Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Newark Museum of Art. We are having a lunch and learn today. It will be an artful conversation with artist Dahlia Elsayed. My name is Millicent Matthews. I am the manager of traveling exhibitions here at the Newark Museum, and I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are broadcasting live on Zoom, and we are also broadcasting live on Facebook Live. We are also using a new feature today. We have closed captioning. It is available if you look at the bottom of your screen and just click on the icon option. You'll be able to view closed captions as well. I just want to take a few moments just to let some others get a chance to join us before we begin. Also, we will have a question and answer session after we speak with Dahlia today. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to enter them in the Zoom comment section and in the section for Facebook as well. And again, welcome to our Lunch and Learn, an artful conversation with artist Dahlia Elsayed. Dahlia, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us here at the Newark Museum today,
Thank,
virtually.
thank you, Millicent. Thanks so much.
I just want to give a brief bio for Dahlia. Artist Dahlia Elsayed makes paintings and sculptures that read as a visual diary of world building. Her fictional landscapes evoke both material place and psychological states and suggest a dual way of reading personal territory that encourages exploration, pause, and suggestion. Today, she will speak about her recent projects and her studio practice during these months of lockdown. So I'm gonna hand it over to you, Dahlia.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will start sharing my screen. Um, here I go now. And I just want to say thank you, everyone who are joining today. And I hope you have had something delicious for lunch or are having something delicious for lunch right now. I love the idea of being together virtually, but communally eating, which is an important way to connect. But thank you for coming. So I wanted to just, I'm going to get this going here, start today first going through a bunch of images, and I'll go through these pretty quickly, but then I'll revisit some of the projects. I wanted to go through a bunch of images from the past 2 decades to set the ground for some of the ideas that we'll be talking about, and just to give an overview of the kinds of work that I make and some of the shapes and images that reoccur through them. Some of these will come up again. And I'll pause here. I'm really interested in writing poetry for landscapes and creating fictional worlds, thinking about making maps for emotions, and and thinking about how landscape and place gets shaped by the words that we assign to it, and how those things connect memory and material experience. So going through the images today, I wanted to think about 4 kind of motifs that reoccur throughout the work: words, maps, flags, and landscapes. I think that's a good way to organize it. So I'll start with words. So we're actually in my studio right now and coming to you live from the studio. And there are 2 main things that go on in this space. I make things and I write things, and then I also just like stare at the walls. But the making and the writing are really connected for me, and there's a lot of similarity in the processes of both, and the way that I think at least I approach both. I think there's actually a lot of overlap for many different people, but what are the things that they have in common in terms of interpreting and the way that we experience interpreting and understanding? So I use the typewriter that's actually right behind me there. And I usually write these long, very free-flowing, loose free writes, actually. And from there, I go into a process of editing and revising and thinking about the text being the most small, compressed unit that it can be, while still giving the viewer some kind of idea of meaning and of story and of understanding, but also leaving it open enough to have multiple interpretations by multiple people. So my interest in this kind of connection of writing and image making goes back a very long time, from when I was a kid. These are some teenage journals, like diaries, but I was also really into comic books and making comics and reading comics. And so that kind of way of understanding story with picture and text were very equal for me, and really like a comfortable way to understand and also a comfortable way to communicate. As I continued that sort of interest as I went into college and then graduate school, and I was doing a creative writing MFA program. And what I found there was, while I was writing these traditional forms, sentences, paragraphs, pages, stories, I was also really interested in the visual way to tell a story and how you could sort of dilute that into form. You know, it could still have a beginning, middle, and end. It could still have character. It could still have setting, but how could you tell that story visually? So I started making prints and artist books, thinking about an alternative way of presenting the same kind of content. Eventually, I just shifted more towards visual work completely. But even in that visual work, I was still really attached to the book form and the idea of a book and what a book does or what a story does. So in this case, this is an accordion book, which is kind of a traditional book form. And then some more expansive book forms, like this one is an unbound book, but it's just multiple pages, called Atlas of Nowhere. It's from 2016. And this is an unbound book of silkscreen prints. But for me, it still functions, and I still think of it as a book, like having a beginning, going through a journey of the pages, and then coming to some kind of conclusion. Even when making paintings, I was still very much attached to the idea of an open book, or the way the book spread, the pages appear, so a diptych form. And then keeping the voice of like a distinct narrator, even in a short form way. And then also thinking about the relationship to poetry, and how in the line breaks, or the spaces, or the breaths that occur when reading poetry, how that would translate into visual work, the way that a negative space might emphasize a positive shape in a field, and how sometimes the important stuff happens in those quiet spaces, or in the spaces between the panels. Even when working in large form painting, so this is 43 by 56, so a pretty big one, and then there are some that are bigger than this, I still wanted to not think of it as like painting with a capital P, but still think about it as an extension of the book world. So you will see here like appearances of those open book spreads, but then also really thinking about how the eye navigates through a visual work, and relating that to the way that a writer might direct a narrative for the reader to experience, and the order of things, and how that can be translated into a visual form of making the viewer move through a certain kind of canvas with a direction. Even in larger works, this is an installation work that was done at William Patterson University, which is a huge lobby sort of gallery space there. And this was a large, I call this the large installation with a tiny book of poems. There was a small book of poems that went with this, that I wrote the text for, and that had images in the book that were related to the images that were on the walls here. So it was called Navigations in the Present Tense. And it was a way to navigate space with the words shaping your experience, and thinking about how people read space, and how they sort of perform this idea of looking and understanding. So maps. So one of the ways that this interest in the author's role and landscape and geography all comes together nicely is in the form of maps. They kind of present an inside and an outside, and I'll talk about this more. Maps always have this a narrator. They have the map maker. So it's a story of that person's belief systems, their point of view. And in the map form, this was a way to present this idea of internal and external space, because while it looks like an aerial view of something, the text is all referring to something more ambiguous. I think also maps have this, I think when we, at least traditional maps, well, maybe we still with our digital maps too, but maps have, people are very used to reading maps and seeing image and text as equal in the map form, right? So we look at like the landscape going up and down, or the elevation, and then we read it, and they're kind of, one doesn't compete with the other in terms of power in the space. So I was sort of drawn to that as an idea. They feel kind of equal, and you can select whatever view that you want to, right? In this sort of making a fictional map. They also allow, by inserting the text here, this a way to disrupt that omnipresent, anonymous, omnipresent map maker's voice. This like weird, like we don't know who makes these maps, but here you have a distinct voice of somebody who is making the map and marking the location, and that can be personal, and it can be funny, and it can be messy, and it can be all of those different things. The maps can show what a traditional map doesn't show, the sort of hidden stories of a place, the feelings, the experiences, and in my case, at least, the lens of a female explorer. And the data can be kind of interpreted in a more poetic way. I mean, these aren't real maps, they're sort of fictional maps, but they do use the traditional symbols of cartography, like a border or a waterway, or in this map here, like the idea of capitals being marked with red dots. They use those traditional, understandable map symbols to frame something that's more unexpected or more subjective. So a lot of the work that we've been seeing here, the map work specifically, it's acrylic on paper. I tend to work medium to large, so I would consider that from 22 inches by 30 inches to like something up to 60 or 80 inches. And it's on watercolor paper. So flags, I guess I want to say that if we think about the process like as an evolution of like mapping and exploring and navigating terrain, part of what comes naturally next after that is like putting a marker down and naming it and saying like, this is this and this is that. And so flags kind of work really well for doing that. They are universally understood as a kind of symbol of territory or of tribe or of identity. And within a flag, you can represent history and a whole bunch of different hard to describe sort of ideas through the symbol of a map. I mean, through the symbol of a flag, I should say. And flags were a way for me to bridge going from a flat two-dimensional surface into a three-dimensional space, because I could actually make physical flags and put them places. So putting them into a real world space had a different kind of presentation and experience. And these flags were done on the continental divide in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. It's 11,000 feet up, and there are these tissue paper flags that were installed temporarily and then taken down. And I want to just add that even though the materials are changing and we're working indoors and outdoors in different kinds of forms, that the process of working is still is a pretty consistent process that doesn't change through the different forms. This was a project from the Newark Museum outside in the, I guess we call it the garden or the patio of the, I guess it's the patio on the street corner of the Newark Museum. And I was, again, working here with the way language is arranged and how it's experienced as we're physically walking through a space. So the text in this piece is from John Cotton Dana's essay, The Gloom of the Museum, that I remixed to form a poem. It's a fabulous essay. It's got these like wonderful lines and these little gems in it. And so I thought about reworking the gems or the lines to have a different kind of reading. And it was the centennial celebration of the museum, so it was installed on the outside. And the lines here, or the poem here, is sort of about, you can read it in a way that it's about gentrification and artists and what was happening in Newark at that time. And then at the end of the parade, at the end of the exhibition, and Millicent, you were part of this parade, we had a parade from the museum, which is down the street, to the Newark Public Library, where Dana also had a pivotal role. And the flags now exist at the museum. And this was a really nice culminating event, a way to sort of close that. So there wasn't just like, oh, they're flags and then they're gone, but to think about having people actually physically move these markers to a different location. So like I had said with maps, you know, being a really good container for a way to tell a story with visual forms, flags are also kind of really perfect for that. It's something that I continue to work with. This was a project that was, it's a handmade paper project. So all the different things, that colors and shapes that you see here, some of them are screen printed, but most of them are handmade paper pulp that's then stenciled onto a larger sheet of paper. I made this at Rutgers, the Brodsky Center. This is a sheet of 8 flags, the way that you would see in an atlas when you open up an atlas and sort of read the page of all the different countries with the different maps. But in this case, what you're seeing here are fictional maps. They have examples are like the Federation of Non-Suffering States or the Confederacy of Deep Space. And so I was thinking about making fictional flags for non-existing spaces, but wishfully existing spaces, I guess I should say too. It has led to a body of work that I continue to do. This is a long-running series since 2016 called Flag Days. And in these flags, I'm sticking to the rectangular shape and thinking about this horizontal field and color and symbols that are easy to read from a distance, and sort of breaking it down into like the components that are most identifiable with flags, the familiar iconography of flags in a rectangular field, but in this case, to communicate messages for our current time. So I'll go through a few of them here. A flag for current conditions. This was one of the first ones that I made, and it was after the 2016 election, and I think it might have been more towards the inauguration, and it was like every day waking up and hearing the news and running out of words to describe your feelings and being unable to like just talk about it. You're just exhausted from the whole thing. So I just thought it would be so much easier if I could just have a flag that expressed what I was feeling through symbols. And so this was a flag for current conditions, a flag for last night, a flag for orphans. I was thinking about how do we communicate in a really noisy world? Is there a way that we can just use a symbol to communicate our feelings? And so that's how the flags were working. I'm going to take a little sip of water. So landscapes. I probably from maybe some of the work that I've shown, and you can see that I'm also really interested in landscape painting as a genre, and specifically thinking about what elements of a landscape make that thing seem real to us, like a horizon line or this suggestion of air or land mass or earth, and perspective, right? This sort of linear perspective that we often see in a landscape painting. And then what would happen if we simplified those elements from the landscape painting and isolated them and rearranged them and distorted them in some way. And then in furthering that idea, thinking about deconstructing and reconstructing to create new ideas about landscape painting, and to hopefully to emphasize the role of like a fictive landscape, and emphasize the role that our own subjective view brings into it. So there's definitely like distortions here and incorrect perspective elements, and also like trompe-l'oeil elements that are going on to trick the eye, and thinking about new forms of landscape painting. And following that, thinking about creating totally fictional landscapes. And I'll talk about, so these are ceramic pieces that are in painted backgrounds and foreground and grounds. So they're dioramas. They're these sort of little dioramas that I then photograph and reconfigure in different settings. They're tabletop dioramas. And what I wanted to do here was think about extending this idea of a fictional landscape, but taking it out even further, or like populating it with figures and specific historical or faux historical stories and myths and futures in a way. So it's kind of a form of speculative fiction, but visual speculative fiction. And it's based on, these are based on sort of diasporan narratives, I'll call them. And so they're a way of telling about place and placelessness, and thinking about the instability of a remembered landscape. So the fogginess of your grandmother's story being passed down to you. Like in this one, every ancestor talks to me at once. In these works, there is no text element except for in the title. And I kind of wanted to remove the text from it, again, just because they're so simplified. I didn't want to, I mean, I don't know why there's no text in it, but I just wanted them to be just the forms themselves. And because they're modular, you can sort of change them. So the text for me makes more sense as a title when there's a specific arrangement. So in 2020, I've worked on two large exhibition projects. This one is at New Jersey City University in Jersey City. It's actually still up and will be up through fall. We don't know if it's going to be open to the public. They've done some programming around it, but maybe there'll be a way to see it in person. And the show is called Common Language. And what I was interested in doing here was thinking about the visual vocabulary of the paintings and how that connects to the new ceramic dioramas. There's also a book in this show. So it's kind of like a connection between all of the different forms and thinking about what brings them together, or what is the sort of origin point of all these different forms. So it's called Common Language, and here's an installation view of that. And then the other show that was supposed to open the day everything closed down and was also extended a long time, is in Washington, D.C. I collaborated with an artist, Andrew Demergen, who's a sound and new media artist. And the show is called Which Yesterday is Tomorrow. And in this space, which is a small gallery space, but with really high ceilings, we were trying to create this sort of immersive landscape of a future place for people to connect. So it was based on historical Ottoman era coffee houses, places where people would come to exchange ideas, where travelers passing from different countries would meet up and, hear conversations and get engaged with each other. And they're often set in these like really lush settings with like carpets and like intricate, tile work. And so I made the wallpaper and the rugs for this to create that kind of experience. There were cushions that you could sit on, and then there was a soundtrack, and there was poetry that came out of the speakers when you sort of kneeled down towards it. It was triggered by the physical body. So I have another view of this here. This is the view looking in the other way, so you can see some of the seating areas there. But again, thinking about physical space and about text in a physical space and about the experience on the body that we can create through manipulating color and shape and sense of concrete world around us. I'd love to, yeah, this show was able to open up to the public recently. I think it was, I'm going to say it was in July. We just did timed entry. And so that was really wonderful to see people interact with the space. And even though it was created to be this communal exchange place with the idea of many people in it at once, people going in one at a time or two at a time shifted it in a way that was also really, well, it was unexpected, but kind of beautiful to see, because it became more of a space about reflection and sitting quietly and listening. So there was an unexpected positive kind of outcome. I'm sure like for many of you, this year has felt like this, like where there's been like detours and like turning back and like going forward and turning back. And I haven't been painting as much. I paint still a little bit and I draw a little bit, but mostly I've been taking a lot of pictures. And then I've been really concentrating my work at this time on a graphic novel that I've been, pondering and thinking about, but kind of really making it happen has happened in the past year, I would say, or a few months, I guess. And this is I've been taking language lessons online with a Syrian refugee for about 1.5 years or close to 2 years. And the project is more of a return. So anyway, it's a project about our conversations and a story, basically, a return to more traditional kind of writing, but with the visual element, which kind of gets me back to like my most youthful memories of comic books and this kind of thing. But it's about language and how language shapes your memory and how memory can then shape your language, and reconnecting with those feelings. And then also about diaspora and the ideas of how a nation state can live in the digital sphere and sometimes be strengthened by its dispersedness and come together in this kind of non-linear space on the cloud. So that's what I've been working on lately. And then I do collect these images as I've been going along, and some of them are up in my studio right now. I think about them as sort of a mood board or a ground idea for future paintings. So you can see some of the motifs that have occurred in the past. And I guess, it's an interesting process when it's like referential, like you keep finding the things that you're interested in and then you make the, the kind of comes, it's like a circular kind of thing. But so you'll see some of these shapes that were in some of the paintings, things that I'm drawn to and I'm taking pictures, and I put those up and kind of think about, what's going to come next in terms of shapes and color and form. So I know I'm a fast talker. I don't know how long that was, but I hope it was, somewhat within the time sphere. So I will stop sharing now and come back to Millicent and see if we have any kind of questions or anything, or yeah.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. That was so informative. And I appreciate that. I learned a lot about your process, and my first introduction to your work was at the museum, of course, during the 2014 Arts Annual. And I just want to say thanks. That was the first, I guess, public art performance I was ever a part of. And it was a great day. It was very, it was very nice.
Like it was so important for me to have like people from the museum and from the community participate, and that was the majority of people who turned out were people from
Yes.
and or working in Newark, and that was really great because it's just it's a way about thinking about extending the inside of the museum to the outside onto the street, which I think is like at the core of Dana's ideas about like having the museum be accessible to people. And so those flags were on display 24 hours a day for a long period of time. So you didn't have to necessarily enter a building to experience artwork. You could engage with it within the common activity of walking by.
That's true. That's true. Just interacting with it on your normal daily routine is a good thing as well, because it sparks an interest, I think. All right. Well, we're going to see if we have any questions for Dahlia. And again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave your comments and questions. We might not be able to get to them all, but we will definitely try. We have a couple of comments. Just a comment: place and placeness, diaspora, this world today. Another comment is, I love your art. And we have a question. You mentioned that you were inspired by comic books when you were younger. Are there any in particular that you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of like the Love and Rockets series. That was like a big one for me. And, and then I started creating my own characters. I mean, Love and Rockets was really important for me because I got to see like punk rock women and girls who looked like me, like our bodies were thick and like there were grandmothers in the story and ethnic food. And so that was really a pivotal one for me, that I saw myself reflected in those stories. So that was important. And then I would just make up comics and, share them with my sister. And they were terribly drawn, like stick figure like comics. But yeah, thanks for that question.
Yes, thank you. Here's someone from Winnie-Fred Victor Hines. I just wanted to comment that your art is extremely refreshing, creative, beautiful, emotive, and breathtaking. Are you having a showing in the near future or another event? If not, where can we see more of your artwork?
Oh, thank you for that question. So yeah, with the current conditions that we're living in, nothing is really open. The show in DC is closed. And then the show in Jersey City, like I said, is still up and hopefully will be available for viewing in some form. It would be great if, we'll see what the possibility, it's a college campus, so there's questions. But in the meantime, you can see it online. The gallery in DC and both Jersey City have done kind of virtual online things. So you can watch the recordings of those, or you could look at my website, which has a ton of different images. And then if you want to sign up, I can let you know when shows are happening. I mean, I would love to be able to do the Which Yesterday Is Tomorrow installation again somewhere, regionally different. That was in DC. Maybe it can happen up here. It was a really special experience.
Okay. We have a question from Trisha Bloom. I love your work, Dahlia. So great to see so much of it. Will your graphic novel be published, or is it conceived as a small run artist book?
Oh, thanks for that question. I'm trying to think about it as a commercially published book. So I'll be working on that, and we'll see what happens. I mean, there's always the possibility of having it be like a digital or artist edition, but I think for this one, I'd like it to be an actual book, commercial world book.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Shinzu Heigler. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. We have a question from Adrian Price. What other artists have influenced your art?
Oh, wow. That's, yeah. I mean, so many, Adrian, like, you know, that's a really tough question actually, because I think if you ask me at different points in my life, it's different people. But I will say that, you know, besides the main artists that we all sort of get to see in museums, I have found that I find tremendous inspiration from people who are maybe working outside of the commercial art world. So, you know, sometimes when I travel to different places and you sort of come upon artists who are working in their studios and are dedicated to their craft, that aren't ever gonna think about an art fair or an art show or a review, and they just sort of go in there and hammer it out every single day and do it for the love. I think that that for me is the most inspirational kind of artwork and artists, and those are the ones that I pull inspiration from. So you know, I'm gonna like not, I'm gonna totally like blank on like calling out people who I love and then afterwards be like, oh, I should have mentioned this person. But yeah, and I also like the people who are sort of blurring the lines between art and objects and functional things, and I guess what would be considered like outsider art. So it's the full range. I do try to, I think one thing that's really, I mean, I teach as well. So it's like something I think about when I talk to students is I just try to look at everything I could possibly look at. Like I inundate with myself with visual information and always have. I love, you know, just looking and looking and looking and looking. And then I think what that does is just, it just lays down this like core, you know, earth of deposits that you have, that when you're thinking about shape and form, you're pulling from all these different resources that aren't from museum art. They're all like that are from all over, from the sort of street, from signage, from like the weird deli up the street who has a display in their window. It's like these are all different things that shape our understanding of aesthetic beauty.
Great. I have a question from Carol Angel. Have you seen and can you comment on the flag display that is now at Rockefeller Center?
So I have not seen it. I keep getting like things about it in my media and email and social media, but I have not seen it. Maybe I would like to see it and go sort of go see what it is. I mean, a lot of artists work with flags. I mean, it's a great form. And just what we were saying about, you know, the Newark Museum installation, this idea of like having something that's a piece of art that can withstand the elements and that can sit outdoors is a beautiful experience because it's not closed off to anybody. But then also like more political artists who have been thinking about flags and the meaning of flags in it, you know, and how to deconstruct or loosen up the grip of those meanings. So, you know, flags are a very rich area of work. And I think, you know, I saw somewhere that there was just a show recently of all flags. So yeah, I will definitely put that one on my checklist to see.
Okay, we have a question. You showed flags mounted at the Continental Divide. What led you to do that? What the purpose? Was it a solo art show?
So I was doing a residency in Snowmass, Colorado. It's like in the Rocky Mountains near Aspen. And I was working on some of those flag paintings that I was showing. And, you know, I'm born in New York, raised in Queens and New Jersey. Like I've never really left. I mean, I've left this area, but like that was the first time I had seen the Rocky Mountains. There was such a tremendous amount of snow that I had never comprehended before. It was wild. So I was really interested in like the severity of that landscape and thinking about like all my paintings all of a sudden started having mountains in them. I was really, really impacted by it, which is what a residency should do, really change your work in some way. But so because I was there for 3 months, I was able to start to explore the surrounding area. And so I had heard about the Continental Divide, and like that to me was also an interesting idea. The idea up a line, like a line that's a divide, and how far it goes, and this idea of a border. So I wanted to go up there, and first I went up there and just sort of like visited it, and then the idea came to put the flags in there, and they're really simple construction. It's just wood and tissue paper, and the climate, or the weather condition there is called tundra, and it's vicious. It's like immediately the tissue just started like flying. It was just like, it was a really interesting experience. And then I thought, oh, that also added this other layer to it, this idea that this tangible thing can disintegrate in the face of nature, or that something in the landscape can cause something to disintegrate, which is an idea that I'm super interested in. Like when I'm marking spots in the map paintings, it's about these moments that don't stay. They come and then they go, and then it's a memory. It comes and goes. It comes and goes. An experience, an exchange, a smell, a sound that you hear. And so the flags then sort of took on this, the quality of the idea in a weird way, as opposed to the idea, as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, that's what led to the making of that project. And that project, I will say, and an important note to artists is like, take lots of pictures, because that was very fast. That project was up and down like quickly. And the pictures from that project are what enabled a bunch of other future flag projects, because of the documentation of that project.
Great, thank you. We have a statement from Natasha. Really loved your work, especially enjoyed how you brought two unusual mediums like comic books and cartography together.
Oh, thanks, Natasha. I mean, in a way, they're not like, it's funny, they're different and not that different, because they do function like, as a reader, you experience them the same way. You're looking at this visual information and you're reading text information, and they kind of go together. So your eye, think about when you're reading a comic, you kind of like look at the picture, read the caption, look at the picture, you kind of go back and forth. And it's the same thing with a map. Like you're like, like 58th Street, and then like you're kind of, so this kind of, the way that we read both of those things are for me similar. And I think maybe for you too, if you're having this kind of reaction to it.
Sure. We have a question from Elsa. What countries were your ancestors from?
My family's from Egypt, and my mother and father both born and raised in Egypt, and my grandparents also born and raised in Egypt. But my grandmother on my mother's side came from Ottoman Armenia, Ottoman Turkey, or I guess it was called Turkey then, but historic Ottoman Empire. And when she was very young, 2 years old, with her mother, around the time of the genocide, was displaced to Egypt, and then she was raised there. And my mother married an Egyptian man, and I'm half Armenian, half Egyptian. A big story condensed into a small one.
Okay. This is from Sonnet. The 2014 installation of flags was great for the museum and a wonderful introduction to you, to Dana's words, and to the museum's connection to the people and place of Newark.
Oh, thank you, Sonnet. I remember Sonnet. It was just, sometimes you do an art project and it just feels good. And that project, from the beginning to, it just felt good. Like the whole thing, I loved doing it. I was, even in the lead up to this, I was telling you, Millicent, like I love the Newark Museum. The Newark Museum, it has actually a different work of mine, like a very early painting from 2000, I'm gonna guess like 2001. I think it is, like a really early painting, a big painting. And, I'm such a fan of the museum and for their role in what they do for the community in Newark and the community around Newark. And just it's just been a great experience working with the museum staff.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
This is from DT Ray. From your experience, what makes for a successful collaboration with curators?
Oh, that's a good question. I think curators come to you with an idea of, what they think. They sort of are responding to something in your work, and to begin with, right? Like that's how you make contact. They can't, maybe you meet them somewhere or they contact you, but they're already responding to something. So there's some kind of mutual interest already there. And I think from there, it's just about communication and thinking about what, you know, sometimes a vision for a show can be really fixed, and different curators might work to get those artists to like fit into a theme. But sometimes curators are really open and thinking about the wide range of possibilities that can connect to that theme or that idea. And I think that those have been, for me, the most positive experiences. And then, you know, anytime you get to like, curators are really smart, and they come to your work with a different reading of it. You know, I think that there's something in the art world today where there's all this pressure on artists where like you have to be your own press agent, and you have to be your own art historian, and you have to be your own biographer, and you're supposed to write your artist statement in a way, and you're supposed to write your press release, and you know, it's a lot of stuff. And then on top of that, you're making this stuff. Those used to be all separate roles for people. So when you have a with a curator, and you know, you're caught up in the making of it, and then they come to you with this analysis of it and this like placement in like a larger historical context, it's so amazing, and you learn so much from them. And I'm just super grateful for those experiences.
Thank you. Do you think you'll have a flag for 2020?
Listen, I hope it's a good flag. That's all I can say. I'm just going to say, I hope, you know, it'll be a good flag. Let's just keep it there.
Okay, we have a question from Vivian. Did Christo Yavashev, who created Gates in Central Park, New York, influence your flag exhibition?
I mean, possibly subconsciously. Yeah, it wasn't like a direct influence. I mean, I think the thing behind my flags were not necessarily the experience that I took from Christo, which was about color and movement and air. That certainly was a part of it, but it was, for me, what was driving that was the language and the idea of like encountering language in a landscape. So it was more about the text for me, and the flags were the container for that text.
Okay, we have a question from Linda Morgan. What were some of the lessons you share with your students about the process and topic of making art? What excites you in your students' work currently? Oh, and she also states that she treasures the work she has from your days at Galleria Faro.
Linda's a collector of my work. So thank you, Linda, and hi. Yeah, I mean, what excites me about my students' work is the commitment to make work in this, I'll use the word crappy world that we're in. Like with all the pressure that my students, I teach at LaGuardia, it's a community college. There's a lot of pressure. People are working, people are worrying about finances, people are worrying about COVID now, worrying about where to, you know, there's a lot of worry for if you're a young person today, for everyone, but specifically young person about your future. And the idea that they are handling all that and then making time in their lives to think about how to add beauty into the world. For me, that's the most exciting thing. That's the thing that humbles me at all times when I see a student like just in a zone and working. One, because it's an escape from the other stuff, but two, because they're thinking about how to contribute to the human experience. Yeah.
I have a question. How long have you taught art?
Oh, I've taught in different forms for a long time, but I've been at LaGuardia at the college level, or at least at that college for 7 years. I'll be going into my 8th year there. And I love it. I love it. I went to a community college for 2 years. So I know that how important the role of a community college is for a large part of our population who don't go on this other path that's limited for a very few, and how the role of a community college can change the trajectory of someone's life. I'm a product of that. So I was especially excited, and I'm always happy to walk into a classroom at LaGuardia.
What have been some of your most, I would say, rewarding or most memorable experiences as an instructor?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example that I just saw recently. One of a student who I had as a painting student, but was, interested in painting, but I think really more towards art history was his area. We have an internship program with the American Folk Art Museum, and he did the internship program, and then they hired him, and he stayed on at the museum, which was great to see. And
That's great.
Christopher Sanchez. I'm going to give him a shout out in case he ever sees this. But he recently, in one of his Instagram posts, was doing the translation, the Spanish translation for a virtual exhibit for the Folk Art Museum. And I just thought, like, how amazing is this? Like, it's so great. Look where he's still in college too, by the way. So like, he's working
Wow.
this really important role in thinking about things that, things that were not virtual programming, bilingual virtual programming. And
Yes.
that one of my students is involved in that is just, it's great. And he was an excellent student too. So
That's great. That's a great story. Okay. We have a question by Carol. As a docent at the Newark Museum, I wanted you to know that we all enjoyed bringing our guests to your work. They liked it, and we enjoyed talking about it.
thank you. Thank you. The painting that was, that's at, I don't know if it's up. I mean, it's been up at different times. I'm not sure if it's up right at this moment, but it's two large panels. And one of them is the cliff of the Palisades. And I guess it's like the Hudson River, the two sides of the Hudson River.
Yes.
And that was a series of paintings that were like comparative landscapes between the Middle East and New Jersey. So that painting is very special to me too, to think about that like in the trajectory of my work. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. We have another statement from Adrian. The flag with the fist would speak well for 2020. Please create it.
Adrian, okay, I'll get on it. I will.
And also, would you like to give us your website information so people could get more familiar with your website and your work, if you don't
Sure.
mind?
Yeah, of course. My website is my name. It's Dahlia Elsayed, DahliaElsayed. You could put in Google any kind of variation of Dahlia Elsayed. It'll come right up because there's not a lot of names like that, but that's my website. And then I'm the same name on Instagram at Dahlia Elsayed. And please follow. And I like to stay in touch with people and hear comments. So that would be great. And you can get information about upcoming shows too from the website.
Great, excellent, excellent. I wanted to just state, I loved seeing your progression, especially your journals and how vibrant and visual they were and how it's sort of transpired into your work in a sense.
Thank you. I still keep those journals. I mean, I have a collection of them. Like I
Wow.
still make those all the time. I write less like boy drama in them because teenage one, but that form is still a very, very important part of my practice. This idea of filling up those journals, and I have tons of them.
Great.
Thank you.
I think we've gotten through all our questions. I want to thank everyone for these really great questions and comments and statements. And do you have any closing words you want to leave us with, Dahlia?
I just want to say thank you, and thanks for everybody who stays interested in the Newark Museum of Art and arts in general. And it's thank you, and stay well.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. It's been quite interesting, and I really hope people got to learn about your artwork and your process. And it was very interesting. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I got to put things together now because, like I said, like my first introduction of your work was really the flag. So it was great to see how all that interplays into, your process and your creativity.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate you coming and joining us today. So I'd just like to give a little heads up of a few of our programs we have coming up. On Friday, August 28th, we have jazz sessions, an evening with Sheila Anderson at 7 p.m. Please join us for this second edition of our virtual jazz session. Our host, Sheila Anderson, will welcome Mimi Jones and Luis Perdomo in a virtual jazz performance that you don't want to miss. And on Saturday, August 29th, we will be having our next roundtable. Our roundtable is storytelling, gathering community, and advocacy, how the arts has helped transform Newark's riverfront. And that's at 3 p.m., again, on Saturday, August 29th. Joint moderator, Marcy DePina, Executive Director of Newark Riverfront Revival, and host Trisha Lawton Bloom, Curator of American Art, for a robust conversation on the intersection of environmental justice and our local arts community. Our panelists for that will be Maria Lopez Nunez, Director of Environmental Justice and Community Development, Ironbound Community Corporation, Dimitri Reyes and Paula Neves with Poem Quest, and Kevin Blythe Sampson, a Newark artist. Please check out our website, newarkmuseum.org, and you can get more information there for these upcoming programs and any other future information. And thank you all for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having a conversation with artist Dahlia Elsayed. And I think we may have one more question. Let's just see. It was from DT Ray, which says, thank you both. Excellent presentation and questions. And if anyone has any other questions, we still have a bit more time. Dahlia, let me ask you, is your exhibition that is up at Jersey City State University, is it accessible virtually presently?
Yeah, I think there is content that there was an artist talk and a kind of like an artist talk that was more geared towards the work in that show, and some older work as well, but it should be up on the NJCU pages, whether, you know, and then I think that we're trying to figure out ways. I think Jersey City is doing like an open studios tour in the fall, which might have some kind of in real life component to it. And we're trying to figure out a way to make that viewable to people. So there is some stuff online, and we're trying to see if there's a way to do it in face-to-face as well.
Okay, great, great. We'll look for that. And let me come up with another question for you. I know you mentioned that this year you'll be instructing online. Have you thought about the changes you would have to make or the differences that will present itself from working virtually instead of with students in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've taught online before, but not studio classes. Like studio classes are different in their experience because so much of it is, you know, sharing a space and looking at a canvas or looking at a drawing. And then so much is, you know, group dynamics and a critique setting. So of course there's ways to do this online and think about, you know, students presenting their work and talking, but, you know, just more of a challenge in terms of keeping the intimacy of that space real. I mean, the assignments are the assignments, and like, you know, you can do those any way that you want. They're kind of on your own anyway, but it's more about the community that we build as a group in a space. So that's the challenge. But, you know, I think that there's ways to do it. I've been part of really successful online communities. So there's ways to do it with regular check-ins and just buy-in and participation from the students. So I'm looking forward to it. And what, you know, I'm also like, you know, I mean, like everybody else, I'm worried about it. Like we want everything to work well.
Yes, yes, yeah, I'm sure. Yes, that's a concern for everyone. We want everything to work well in this new kind of normal we have going on right now. We have one more statement, which is anonymous. It says, thank you so much. Fascinating, beautiful work.
Yeah.
It's very true. So I want to thank you all again. Thank you so much, Dahlia, for joining us today. And as I mentioned before, please visit our website, newarkmuseum.org, and you can get information on our jazz session coming up Friday, the 28th at 7 p.m. and our roundtable, which will be held on Saturday, the 29th at 3 p.m. Please do check out Dahlia's website as well, and that's dahliaelsayed.com.
Great.
All right. And thank you for joining us all today, and have a wonderful afternoon. And thank you for joining us here at the Newark Museum of Art.
Thank you.